Well, I'm standing next to the typical size woman of the turn of the century, from the 1800s to the 1900s. And I've got a couple pieces here that are really beautiful, and I'm excited to show you. But I love to start out with this one first. This was, could have been used as a wedding dress, but was probably a day dress worn for, by someone of means that might be just walking on the street. But we're going to see why it is more of that Edwardian style or turn of the century because of the way it's constructed. I can tell you here there's a train. So that's one of the things that leads us to thinking it might have been at one time used in bridal. But we know that women often used even their bridal dresses for everyday clothing. My grandmother was this size, so this is turn of the century, 1900, and the size of the female, normal size. The construction here, a rather high neck, but some interest in the way this is created, almost lapel-like down the front, and then the front of the dress going all the way to the ground. You could see ladies in New York City walking around. The train comes back for its really last visit in turn of the century. It is the Crown Prince and his wife in England that kind of add this style of walking with these fun garments and being able to display your wealth. Turning this around, I want to show you the back, and why we think it is from this time period is there's no bustle. There's a little bit of treatment at the back, and at this time, remember, we're not in cars, we'll sit in a carriage, but when we're out showing off what we own in our clothing, we want some interest at the back. So even though there remains no bustle back here, we do have a lot of back interest. We know that this is after the bustle period because of the shaping that's created here. We've got our waistline back, but we have smooth hips going down, and we don't have that bustle, just a little bow to accentuate that area. Something that I would like to point out on this dress is this rather three-quarter length sleeve. We start to see it in the late 1700s with our kind of French-inspired gowns of that time period, and then we see it show up in the latter part of the 1900s going into 1800s going into 1900s, and this is something that later on in about 1990 Moschino sees this three-quarter sleeve. He hadn't seen it since the early 50s in little blouses that were worn by schoolgirls, and decides to start creating this three-quarter sleeve in a big way. And it really did take the fashion industry by storm, and even today you will find a three-quarter sleeve in many of the designs on the runway today, really based on the strength of sales. It looks good on a lot of different body types, and it also is great in different weather. In Arizona, we don't know much about sleeves, especially in the summer, but in the rest of the world it can be cool even in the summertime, and so this three-quarter sleeve is still a really national bestseller, at least for American ready-to-wear. So here is our lady walking through Central Park. Okay. Keeping in that same time period of the 1890s to 1900, I want to bring out a little bit of a walking skirt and a jacket. So we're still in the park, but this is definitely a different season. The dress that I began with is very lightweight cotton. It's stiffened, and this is, a rather large weave. Definitely a summer garment or spring garment. This definitely has the overtones of fall. Not only in what we might consider fall colors today, but also the fabrication. Inside, this has a lining, and a double lining or an underlining underneath this. So the skirt really has a lot of support to it, but mainly done not for support because we're still going to be wearing our petticoats. What it's for is for warmth. So this is how we can tell a garment that is meant for a different season or a fall season. I wanted to point out, very much like our Victorian Selena in our video for the Victorians, the back of the skirt, the pleating, let me see if I can hook this up, the pleating that replaces the bustle. Yeah. Even my eyelets are breaking down here. Okay, there we go. So the sides are smooth, the front is smooth, but the back has, we're moving away from that bustle and just a little bit of pleating, soft pleating in the back. So we're removing our cages and we're just going to rely on petticoats to give us some fullness at the bottom. This is a beautiful taffeta. It is created out of cotton and silk. That's why it's not shredding. The cotton actually supports the silk even after 100 years. The pleating that you see at the bottom, this double row, the tucking here, very reminiscent of that late 1890s style. The smoothness around the hips also conforms to that. Well, over that skirt is a matching bodice or jacket. You can see in the same coloration. And then we're going to turn it around and then you see how it completes the front with that same kind of fall pile fabric. Each of these buttons are hand crocheted. It's very amazing, all of the work that goes into this. This jacket does have some boning in it. Here in the front, these are steel stays that hold that up. The all-important ribbon to hold this at the waist so that when you raise your arms, maybe to hold your parasol, the jacket doesn't rise up and your undergarments or get forbid, your skin might show. We see the back having a little bit of ornamentation here done in the shape of a point in the back, but not the pleating and all of the button treatment that we saw when we wore the bustle. So I want to match this up and let you get a good view of this garment put together. And again, this particular one we feel might have been made by a seamstress because there's no labeling inside. It's still magnificently made. It has a cotton lining, so the lining is still present. There is before you button your jacket, there is a set of hook and eyes that will literally hold this tight to your waist, again, keeping it down so that you have movement without shifting your jacket. And there you have a really beautiful fall garment, keeping in that 1890s time period. And again, it will go through to the early 1910, especially if you're a woman 30 or older. The last dress I want to show in this time frame is a beautiful day dress. And again, sometimes we see that these could have been worn for weddings. They also could have been just a day dress. White was a very popular color, and I know our textbook talks a little bit about that. The lingerie dress of the 1870s, we see that continue. This, when we look at it, we really see this 1890s shape. The front of the woman's figure becomes almost bird-like. It becomes the monobosom, as they call it. So you have this, there's no separation. You are just like a shelf up here. So the shelf moves from the back to the top, and this monobosom gives you kind of like a bird's breast. We call it the S-curve. You've been studying that in your reading, but it's definitely that the front is poofed out, almost like a bird, and then sweeps to the back very smoothly, not in a bustle, but in a normal S-curve, and very popular as we move from the 1890s to 1900. The bodice definitely has a waist. It has a cinch for us, and I have to point this out. It came from Dev, D-E-V-V, and it could have been the dressmaker's initials. It could have been the name. I've tried to Google to see if there was a small department store using Devi, lots of different combinations, and I haven't been able to find anything about it, but it says Sioux City, and those of you that know geography, it's Iowa, and so something, even in Sioux City, Iowa, was very fashionable. Fashion is traveling so much faster than it did even 100 years before. We have newspapers. You know, newspapers are a penny. We share our newspapers if you only have a penny between the family. But I mean, we're well read. We see pictures of everything. People are traveling. They visit relatives who have moved west. So even the western states have really fashion within 6 months of the rest of the world. It isn't like it had to wait 2 years to get here. Again, our beautiful silk lace is disintegrating, but you can see, you know, what a beautiful bodice this is. It very much has that rounded shape. If I put this together, it would literally look like the mono breast and a little bird here. The boning is shaped so that it gives you this kind of poofed out front. The skirt that goes with is almost non-existent, so I'm glad I get to at least record a tiny bit with you. There is an underbodice that went under this top. Ooh, looks like confetti. That would have fit. This is all boning up here, and that's really about all that's left. And it wasn't meant to be unbuttoned or shown. It literally was to keep the skirt hanging pristinely and to keep this without having other garments other than the corset underneath. So this boning held you nice and firm underneath, but the fullness of the fabric here gave you that bird-like bodice. And then the skirt, and again, so if they had trains, we often thought of them as wedding dresses, but that's modern thinking, because the only time we ever have a train on anything in social occasion is for wedding dresses. But these were popular. We talk about the train disappearing in the gay 90s and the Edwardian times, but they were still existing. And perhaps in Sioux City, this was a style that lasted a little bit longer, wearing of the train into the 20th century, and we know that did happen. So this gives you an example of some beautiful pieces as we leave the bustle and move in to the 21st century.